Hey guys, welcome to my development board showdown. Today I'm going to go through with you guys all of the development boards that I've collected over the years and tell you guys which ones are my favorites, the pros and cons of each board, all of the nice little general specs that are interesting to us development guys. So sit down and get ready for the showdown. The first board that I wanted to talk to you guys about, you probably know what's coming up here, is the ESP8266. This little guy here. This is a fantastic little board. I have been using these for about probably the past 6 months. This is another form factor, another version of it. They're great for basically single purpose applications that don't require a lot of extra hardware. They don't have hardware PWM. They only have one channel of ADC. They're not highly expandable boards, but what they are great for is Wi-Fi. They have a built-in Wi-Fi stack, which just makes them one of my favorite boards to use right now in almost any project. With a $2 board like these guys, you almost want to just put them into a project just to say that you have it in a project. So I love these little guys. They do have a 32-bit CPU running at 80 megahertz. They require 3.3 volts, which is starting to become the norm away from 5 volts, which we've had for so many years. They are power hungry and they do want a clean power supply. So that's one thing to think about whenever you're setting up a project, is that when they're transmitting, they'll use anywhere from about 150 to 300 milliamps, and they want clean power or else they will reset on you. So make sure you have good clean power and a lot of it. They're Arduino IDE compatible. They didn't used to be, but now they are. And they're programmed via USB to serial connectors, so your FTDI connectors and all of those things will work. The O1 module here has got 3 I/O pins, and this is, I believe, the 12 module. And I think that has something around 10 usable I/O pins on it. You guys will have to let me know in the comments. I can't remember off the top of my head. But they're great little boards for just, you need to trigger a relay via Wi-Fi, or you need to read a single sensor. They're great cheap little sensor nodes. They're one of my favorite boards at the moment. So I could go on and on. The next board or boards that I want to talk to you guys about are the Teensys. So this is the Teensy 2.0, and this here is a Teensy 3.0. They're now up to 3.2. It's the same form factor as the 3.0, just with improved hardware. And they're great boards. I use the Teensy line for just about any general project that I have that requires a fair amount of I/O and a decent processor. The Teensy 2.0 is an 8-bit AVR running at 16 megahertz, and it uses 5 volt logic, while the 3.x line of Teensys, these larger ones here, they run a 32-bit ARM Cortex processor that runs up to 96 megahertz if you overclock it. They're really good. They are, again, Arduino IDE compatible. They do require a software add-on to the Arduino IDE to make them work, or to at least be able to upload code to them. But it's not a big deal to install it, and it's nice and quick. They have 32 kilobytes of flash and 2.5K of RAM. That's actually the 2.0 model spec. The 3.0 has, or the 3.x, so this is the 3.0 and it has 130K of flash and 16K RAM. But the newer models have 260K of flash and 64K of RAM. So the Teensy, especially the Teensy 3.x line, they're extraordinarily powerful. They're my go-to microcontroller for anything that requires more than a couple of pins and probably 100 lines of code. They're very expandable, very powerful, have a ton of I/O. The 2.0 has 21 I/O ports that are breadboard easy access, 11 ADCs, and 7 PWMs. So really nice. The 2.0, the smaller one, also features an external, both a USB and an external hardware-only serial port. These modules can mimic any USB device. They're not just a USB to serial connection. They can be any HID, human interface device on your computer. They can be a mouse, keyboard, joystick, a MIDI device. They're really powerful. The 3.x, whatever it is, 3.1, 3.2, has 23 easy to access I/O ports that are on the breadboard, and 10 of those are analog digital, so analog reads, and 10 of those are pulse width modulatable. So they're really powerful boards. I love them. The 3.x even has 3 hardware dedicated serial ports, so you can talk to a lot of devices just over UART. Really great devices. I love them. The next 2 that I want to talk about are the ATtiny85 and the ATtiny84. The ATtiny85 is, until the ESP came around, the 85 was my go-to small microcontroller, and you don't actually need any extra hardware other than to, power these guys, but they don't need any external crystals or anything. And they're really, really powerful. They're running an 8-bit AVR that, if you don't have an external crystal, you can run it up to 16 megahertz. With an external crystal, you can go up to 20 megahertz. They run anywhere from 2.5 to 5 volts. So basically whatever you want to throw at it, it'll work. They aren't programmed through serial. You actually do need an ISP programmer to upload code onto both of these, actually. That is one thing that is not so great about them, is that you do need to have a separate programmer, which most of you probably don't have an ISP programmer. You mostly will have your little FTDI programmers or whatever. You can't use these on the ATtinys. It doesn't work. You have to have a different kind of programmer. So they have 8K of flash and 512 bytes of RAM. So pretty minimal. Again, only if you're doing a small, very simple project do you want to use these. And they don't actually, again, they don't have any serial port. So if you want to have serial communication, you have to use software implemented serial, which with Arduino libraries, there is software serial, so it's not that bad. But it does take up processor and memory overhead. They have 5 I/O pins. The ATtiny85 has 5 I/O pins, 3 of which can be used for ADC and 3 for PWM. And it's a great little board. I have tended to replace now a lot of the projects where I would use the 85 with the ESP modules, just because they're more powerful and basically the same cost. The 85 and 84 are both around $1 or $2, and the ESP modules are basically about $2 also. So that's, yeah. The ATtiny84 is actually, even though it's more powerful than the 85, I tend to not actually end up using it. And the reason I don't end up using it is because by the time I need as much I/O as these have, it's got 11 I/O pins, I'm probably going to be upgrading to a different microcontroller, probably my Teensys. So I actually haven't gotten much use out of the 84. Again, similar to the 85, it's got 8K of flash and 512 bytes of RAM, programmed via an ISP, and uses 2.7 to 5 volt logic, and again runs at up to 16 megahertz without an external crystal. If you guys love the 84, let me know, because I just haven't had a real use for it where either the 85 wasn't a better choice because I didn't have a lot of I/O, or I needed something more powerful, so I upgraded to the Teensy. But if you guys love it, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you guys. Now, the next board is the one you probably all know. It's the Arduino, the classic Arduino Uno. And this is a great board. It's great for beginners. It's got all the nice little sockets so you can just plug components straight into it. It tends to become a pain when you have a lot of wires wired into it because it's not breadboard compatible. You can't just pop this onto a breadboard like you could with a Teensy. These are great for beginners. They're more or less indestructible. You can put whatever kind of power into it, up to about 20 volts. It's got reverse polarity protection. It's got 6 analog inputs and 6 analog outputs, and a total of 13 digital I/O pins. Runs at 16 megahertz with 8-bit AVR. It's the classic Arduino, but once you've done more than a couple dozen projects, you start to want to phase this out because you realize that other development platforms are a lot easier to use and less frustrating when it comes to wiring. So like the Teensys can just be popped right into a breadboard. The Arduino also has, again, 32K of flash, 2K of RAM. It's a good board. I have no problem with this board, but once you get more complex, you probably are going to want something more powerful and phase this out. It's also really big. Well, it may be big, but it's not as big as the Arduino Mega. Now, I honestly have not used this for a single project. I got this probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's a good board. It's, like the Arduino, it's more or less indestructible. It's got just so much I/O. It's got something around 70 I/O pins in total, 15 pulse width modulation pins, 16 analog input pins, 4 serial lines. It's a really good, powerful board. It's just, if you need that much power, you're probably not using an Arduino anymore. It's got 256K of flash and 8K of RAM, and it's programmed via the USB to serial converter, and obviously is Arduino IDE compatible. I guess it's useful if you're still, you're someone on the Arduino and you want more I/O, but I haven't had a use for it. If you have, definitely let me know in the comments. Maybe there's some super awesome Arduino Mega projects out there. If you are doing something with a lot of I/O and you've grown beyond the Arduino, you've probably seen this around, or at least know the processor on it. This is the STM32F4 Discovery board, and it's a really, really powerful board. This is the most powerful non-Linux running development board that I have, actually. It costs about 20 bucks, and it's got a 32-bit ARM Cortex M4 running at 168 megahertz. I believe it's 3.3 volt logic and takes 5 volt power through the USB interface, which it's also programmed through that interface. It's got a megabyte of flash storage, so it's just got huge amounts of flash for your program, and 192K of RAM, so also a ton of RAM. And it's got 80 I/O pins, so it's got 80 little connections on that board that are configurable. You can actually map the ports to many, many different functions, so it's hard to say exactly how many PWM pins it has because they're all pretty mappable. It does have the ability to support 8 simultaneous serial USART connections, and it's a really great board. This actually has on board an accelerometer as well, and 4 LEDs, and a user configurable button, and I believe even a microphone. But specifically the STM32 processors are just really great processors, really, really powerful, and you're probably going to end up using this over the Arduino Mega there, just because at the point where you have this much I/O and need to do this much work, the Mega is probably not going to cut it. So now we're going to get to the small section of Kickstarter projects that I've backed. So this here is the Flutter Basic. So this was a development board that I thought was really awesome and I just haven't had a use for. It's a wireless development board, so it has built in a radio system that is actually all encrypted as well. So it's an encrypted wireless protocol that they've developed. It runs a 32-bit ARM Cortex at 64 megahertz, so pretty fast processor. Has 5-volt power and logic, a reset button and a user configurable button, and a tricolor LED there. It's got 15 I/O pins, 5 of them are ADC, and I'm not sure how many pulse width modulatable pins there are. I couldn't find the documentation to figure that out. If you guys know how much, let me know in the comments. It's got 64K of flash, 16K of RAM, and it costs about $35, I think. It does claim to have a 1 kilometer range. I imagine that's not so true if you're not in an open field away from any other radio signals. It's probably more like a 1/4 of a kilometer, but advertised as 1K. And it's got mesh networking built in, so even if that range isn't truly a kilometer, you can use these in a mesh network, so they can talk to each other as long as there are nodes in between. Overall, a nice little board. I thought it was very pretty, and I just haven't had a use for it yet. If you guys have played with one of these and have made a cool project, definitely let me know in the comments. And this is the SparkFund Microview. So this was another Kickstarter that I backed, and it's a cool little Arduino compatible board. It's actually this bottom part, this is just the programmer for it, and then this is the actual Microview itself. So you don't actually need, this is just for uploading programs. So it's got a little 64 by 64 OLED display. It's an 8-bit AVR, so it's not anything high-end. Got 32K of flash, 2K of RAM, and 18 I/O pins, where 3 of those are PWM and 6 are ADC. And if you want to start off with Arduino and you want a little display, this is probably actually a pretty good unit. I haven't had a ton of use for it, but the little screen there has a really good set of libraries and is really easy to use. So if you want to get into Arduino and microcontroller development but want a little screen on your dev board, this is probably a good unit. It costs about $40 for this and another $15 for the programmer, so you're looking at about $55 in total. It's kind of expensive, but it's cute. I like it. I haven't had a use for it, but I like it. And here we are, down to the last two. The Intel Edison and the Raspberry Pi. I'm going to start off here with the Edison. So this is a really, really cool, but I'm not sure how useful platform. It's got a very powerful 500 megahertz dual core Intel Atom system on a chip, plus a 100 megahertz Intel Quark processor for the MCU, for the microcontroller side of things. It runs Yocto Linux as a standard OS and has 4 gigabytes, that's a huge amount, of onboard flash storage, a gigabyte of RAM. It's got Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, USB and configurable I/O, and it's a really powerful device, and I haven't had a use for it. It's great, don't get me wrong, but what project requires, a whole computer, so your gigabyte of RAM and 4 gigabytes of flash storage and Linux and an x86 platform with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and USB? It's just too much. It's great, it's super powerful, but there's just too much going on, and that reflects in the price. The Edison board itself is actually only this little top bit here, this top board, and this board is around $50. And without any of this like expansion board that gives you USB power and breaks out all the I/O, it's pretty useless. So you then have to get the expansion boards, which can be anywhere from about 15 to 40 or 50 bucks, depending on what expansion board you're getting, and it ends up costing you $100. It's just, it's a great board, Intel. I love it. I truly do. I have one of these running in my house, and it does nothing. I have no real use for it. I'm sorry to say, it's just too powerful for its own good. That being said, it's really cool. It's tiny. This thing is really, really tiny. The actual Edison itself, if you have no expansion board, is just larger than an SD card. It's really cool and has very little use in my opinion. So, oh well. And that means that I must favor the Raspberry Pi, the reigning king. This is a great, great board. This is the original Raspberry Pi Model B. It's got 100 megabit Ethernet, 2 USB ports, audio and RCA video, a whole expansion port over here. It's got HDMI output and powered from USB and takes an SD card. And it's only a single core 700 megahertz processor. It's really not that powerful, but what it is great for is if you just want a little tiny mini server. So I have a couple of these in my house. I have one that runs my home automation system, and if you've been following my home automation tutorials, you've been seeing me use it. I have one of these running as a Git server in my house. They're really great single-purpose boards. If you need a little Linux server, maybe you want a little web server in your home, whatever. It's a great board. I definitely favor it over the Edison because the Edison, there's no mouse or keyboard or screen. With this, you can plug in a screen, either HDMI or RCA, and you can plug in mice, keyboard, Wi-Fi dongles, whatever you need, and it's got audio on it. So, and you can actually plug displays directly in. I can't remember which one of these. I guess that one's the display header. It's just a better development platform. That may be great for a single purpose that you have some real need for Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, all the RAM and all the processor and x86, but this is really probably what you're going to be grabbing for, and especially with the Raspberry Pi 3 coming out. The 3, all of these cost about $35, and the Raspberry Pi 3 basically has everything that has. It's got what is have a quad core processor on it. Maybe it's dual core. I can't remember. You guys let me know in the comments. But the Raspberry Pi 3's got a quad or dual core processor, Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, and it's 35 bucks, not 100 bucks. So I'm a fan of the Raspberry Pis. That being said, again, to get this up and running, at a minimum you need a 5-volt power supply, and you need, if you're doing development on it, like you're using it as a computer, you'll need a mouse and keyboard, and you'll need a screen, but and that will raise your price to start. You also need an SD card, because that's where all the memory, all the flash comes from. But in general, I much favor this over the Intel Edison. So I love these boards. Raspberry Pis are great. So that about wraps up my development board Showdown. My favorites out of all of these, the ones that I tend to go to, you can probably tell at this point. If it's Wi-Fi or anything like that, I go for the ESP8266. No questions. It's a great board. It's cheap. It's $2. I love it. Wonderful little guy. If I don't need Wi-Fi, I might use the ATtiny85, but honestly, these are so cheap, I may just go for one of these always at this point. For anything that is still a microcontroller, but I need just that much more power and that much more I/O, I'm going to jump for my Teensys here. Teensy 2 is what I'm going to go for if I need basically an Arduino, and if I need something more powerful than like an Uno, I'm going to go for the Teensy 3. Again, $16, $20. It's cheaper than the $25 for an Arduino. Great, super powerful little boards. My favorites. I love them to death. And then, as you can tell, I'm a Raspberry Pi fan. So if I need some small mini server or anything like that, I'm going to jump for a Raspberry Pi, not the Edison. Sorry, let's just even knock that out of the way. So those are my favorites. Let me know what your favorites are, though. I want to hear from you guys. What are your favorite development boards? Why do you think my opinion on these development boards is wrong? Come on, let me have it. So if you like this video, like and subscribe to my channel. You can find me also at itkindofworks.com and on Twitter at itkindofworksinc. So yeah, let me know what you guys think, and I will see you guys later. Take it easy.